Planning and Zoning Commission for the City of Granbury will now come to order at 6 p.m. on Monday, June the 12th, 2023, Granbury City Hall, City Council Chambers. The first item on the agenda tonight are public comments on agenda items that are non-public hearing items. Is there anyone that would like to speak on an agenda item that is a non-public hearing? If not, we'll go to the consent agenda, and there's two items. The first item, the two items on the consent agenda are approval of the minutes from the regular May 8th, 2023 regular meeting minutes, and C2, a replat. Anything on the consent agenda that someone wants to be pulled off the consent agenda? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Motion to approve.
A motion to approve the consent agenda as presented by Mr. I may need to go home. Erdman tonight. Second by?
I'll second.
Okay, Mr. Moore. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The first item on the public hearing is D1. Consider the request of Timothy Dale Reynolds for a special use permit to allow a short-term rental, STR rental, residential, unhosted in a residential 7,000 R7 zoning district. The property's address is 125 South Travis Street. Kira? Jeez Louise.
Sure. Before I start the presentation onto this item, I'd like to introduce the Plan Commission to a change in our process of how we've been handling these. Since we're coming up to July 5th, which is a year after the adoption of the new ordinance for short-term rentals and bed and breakfast, we've changed our recommendation. Nearly all of the short-term rentals and bed and breakfast have come in for renewal of their SUPs. So we've adapted those to the new regulations and are in good order. We have, I think, 3, maybe 4 that are still pending and are in process. So you'll see that where these have been in good standing and have no changes, we're recommending a 5-year term. And where there have been changes or not necessarily in good standing, and by the way, we haven't heard of any of those in quite some time, so that's good for the community. But nonetheless, where there are changes, we're recommending a 1-year term. Of course, as the Plan Commission, you have the option to decide conditions of your liking. So now I'll begin presentation on this first item, D1.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the site is located at 125 South Travis Street, as shown here on your slide showing the aerial. The site is outlined in teal, and it is zoned R7 with historic preservation overlay. The history on this site was a 2019 SUP for a 1-year short-term rental unhosted, 2 guest suites. That continued to a 2020 approval for 3 years, and the same situation, unhosted, 2 guest suites. And the proposal is to continue that with a short-term rental unhosted, 2 bedrooms. This is the zoning map showing the site location outlined in teal. That yellow color is indicative of a single-family zoning district. So the surrounding area is single-family with some short-term rentals. Historic preservation review is not required. There are no improvements proposed on this property. This is the context map. Those outlines in pink are nearby short-term rentals. So you can see there are a few on this block. This is the site plan demonstrating the 2 parking spaces. 1 parking space is required for each bedroom. This is the floor plan showing the number of bedrooms and uses for each room in the main building or the residence. The application. The SUP criteria, as you've heard in past meetings, these are the criteria by which you're to make your decision. First, is the use harmonious and compatible? Based on the information presented, it can be if it complies with the zoning requirements and other city code requirements. This is the 3rd request for the site. Staff has not heard of any complaints or enforcement activity on the property. The next one, number 2, are the activities requested by the applicant normally associated with the requested use? Based on the information provided, they are. Number 3 is the nature of the use reasonable. The site is located in the Historic Preservation Overlay mapped area, and that's the area designated by policy and by the zoning ordinance for this type of use. And number 4, such other measures that would secure and protect the public health, safety, and general welfare. The property provides 2 parking spaces on site. That's 1 parking space per bedroom. There are additional criteria to determine also, and this is in the zoning ordinance 11.1b. Some of these repeat what we've already been over, so I'm not going to burden us with time to specify these. The content is also taken out of the staff report that was provided to you before the meeting. In addition, these criteria do repeat the fact that the use and activities on the property must comply with the city code, the zoning ordinance, and other rules and requirements. It also incorporates statements regarding the potential for removal of the SUP. And regarding public notice, on June 1st, staff mailed out 28 public notices to owners of property. And on May 27th, we also published in the Hood County News as is required. As of this writing, as of today, this is updated. We've received no letters in favor, and we've received 1 letter in opposition to the request. Staff is recommending approval of the request, subject to a 5-year term, subject to the site plan and the floor plan, as well as providing screening along the south side of the driveway. There are no screening hedges or fencing there to screen the headlight sweep. And the short-term rental shall be limited to no more than 2 bedrooms, and the 5, 6, and 7 refer back to the zoning ordinance and the city code that the use needs to be in compliance with the city code and zoning ordinance supplemental standards. And with that, these are your voting options. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Kira. I'll open the public hearing. Is the applicant here? And if so, would you like to speak? Would you like to? Okay. Any questions for the applicant? If so, I'll bring him forward. If not, any questions for staff? Thank you, sir. If not, I'll close the public hearing and entertain a motion on the SUP request.
Make a motion to recommend approval as presented.
I have a motion by Mr. Overdeer to approve the SUP as presented. Do I have a second?
I have a second.
A second by Mr. Hallman. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next item on the agenda is D2, public hearing. Consider the request of Catherine J. Casey for a Pacific use permit to allow a short-term STR residential unhosted in a residential 7,000 R7 zoning district. The property address is 210 South Lambert Street. Kira?
Thank you. Again, as shown on this aerial map is the site outlined in teal. The surrounding properties are improved with single-family residences, and we'll see on the buffer map here how close other short-term residences are, or short-term rentals, I apologize. The zoning on this site is R7 with historic compatibility overlay. And the zoning, you can see that yellow on the property. The property again outlined in teal. They're proposing a hosted, they're proposing a short-term rental, unhosted residential 7,000 square foot lot. I think my slide didn't get updated there. And this shows the site and with the buffer and the surrounding short-term rentals outlined in pink, and there's some outlined in black as well as blue. This is the site plan showing the site with access from Lambert. The parking there is adequate for 2 parking spaces, which is shown up on the lower right. Those little black rectangles are parking spaces. So with the 2 bedrooms, they're proposing 2 parking spaces, which is per the code. This is their floor plan for the home. It shows 2 bedrooms, and other living uses in the other rooms. Their application. This is the SUP criteria, again, on which you make your decisions. I'll just summarize these. Is the use harmonious and compatible? We find that it is. The activities requested are normally associated with the requested use. Yes. Is the nature of the use reasonable? It's in the historic mapped areas and designated appropriate for the proposed use, provided that the standards are complied with. And will the measures secure the public health, safety, and general welfare? They will be providing adequate parking. These are the additional criteria as mentioned previously and as contained in your staff report. They generally repeat with some additions to more details on complying with the zoning ordinance and the city codes, as well as the ability of the city to enforce and take action on the SUP if needed. On June 1st, city staff mailed out 31 public notices and published notice on May 27th in the newspaper. And today we had one letter received in favor, and that was handed to you just before this meeting started, and one letter in opposition to the request. And staff recommends approval with the following conditions: a term of 5 years, except as required, conforming to the site plan and the floor plan, and providing shrubs for the headlight sweep. Let me go back to my staff report. I'm a little concerned to get this right because that one slide was not correct. So yes, we have a 5-year term, compliance with the site plan and the floor plan, shrubs for the screening and the short-term rental, no more than 2 bedrooms, and then our other 3 standard conditions. And just let me take a second here. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. And these are your voting options. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Kira. Would the applicant like to speak? Any questions for the applicant, commission members? Any questions for staff?
I just had one. Kira, I've noticed that on both of these, we've talked about screening. And is this something that's changed, or?
No, it's not something that has changed. It's required of all of the short-term rentals where the parking sweep is, when you turn in the drive and the headlights shine. The idea is to at least provide screening of the headlights on the car from the adjacent property. With a short-term rental, you may have people coming and going at different hours than a standard residential property.
But I mean, did they not have this before, the properties?
Some of them have, and some of them have not. So that is just considered a minor improvement. The ordinance previously, prior to July of last year, hadn't had certain items as a standard requirement. So this is a renewal, as a standard in the zoning ordinance. Now it's required to have that screening.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
And the applicant's aware of that? The applicants are aware of the screening requirement?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, so open the public hearing. I see no speaker cards. No. So any further discussion? I close the public hearing and entertain a motion on the SUP request, please.
I'll make a motion to recommend approval as presented.
A motion by Mr. Hallman to approve the SUP as presented. A second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Class. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next item on the agenda is D3. Consider the request of Eva Rower for a specific use permit to allow short-term rental STR residential unhosted in a residential 7,000 R7 zoning district. The property's address is 520 West Bluff Street. Kira?
Okay, here's your first slide. The site again is outlined in teal on this slide. The site is zoned R7, and proposed use is unhosted short-term rental with 3 bedrooms. This is a renewal from a year ago, and I'm sorry, some of this language on these slides did not get updated. This should not be hosted. This is an unhosted short-term rental with 3 bedrooms. And this is the 600-foot buffer, the context map that we provide for you, showing nearby short-term rentals outlined in pink. And this is the site plan. So what's changed on this site compared to a year ago is the building received approval from Historic Preservation Commission to enclose the garage. When you look at this site plan on West Bluff Street, you can see the driveway that leads to the house. The furthest in parking space, the furthest in rectangle, okay, that's a parking space. Previously, that was a carport, and the Historic Preservation Commission has approved it to be enclosed. In addition, the applicant is changing some of the inside of the building, some of the rooms, and creating a second, like a second story. They're calling it a loft because it has space to overlook the first floor, so it's a second floor. The site plan, what I want to draw your attention to is that the tandem parking is not allowed to be counted for short-term rentals. And that's what we see there with those 2 parking spaces, those 2 rectangles stacked end to end. So the 2 parking spaces that can be counted can be the ones that are in the back towards the top. There's a rectangle that shows 2 parking spaces. And then those 2 satisfy the request for 2 of the bedrooms, and then the one at the front satisfies the 3rd bedroom. Okay, so that's 3 parking spaces, 1 per each bedroom. Okay, now we'll look at the floor plan. Okay, this is the floor plan that was approved in 2022. At the upper right corner, that's the carport that's been converted to an enclosed carport. Behind that, where the door opens into the carport, that's been converted to stairwell. Okay, the rest of the first floor has remained pretty much the same. So now we'll go to the 2023 approved Historic Preservation Commission approved floor plan. You see the dash towards the lower area of the drawing? The floor plan below that dashed line is the 2nd story, or the loft, if you will. So you can see the stairwell up to the loft. There's I'm not sure what they've labeled it right offhand, but there are 3 rooms there. One is a utility room, and the other one is like a, I don't know, game room or something. And then one beyond that is also labeled as not a bedroom but something else. And then there's a small bedroom or bathroom on that floor. So the 3 guest rooms would be on the first floor. Okay, I think everybody's clear on that. I wanted to hold this a little bit if you have questions. Okay. And then the application. The SUP criteria that we've walked through many times. The first one is it harmonious? It's the second request. Again, it has a change with a new 2nd floor as explained. Are the activities requested normally associated with the requested use? And they are. Is the nature of the use reasonable? It's in the historic district. That's where these uses are geared to be located. And are other measures taken that would secure the health of the community and general welfare? And they're providing the 3 off-street parking requirements of 1 per bedroom. And these are the same criteria that we've spoke to before in making your decisions. The parking must be screened, and it will be screened. The use would be harmonious, and so on. And also requirements of the city code apply. The special standards in the zoning ordinance apply, and then the ability to provide enforcement of such things. And this is all contained in your staff report. Public notice was provided on June 1st. We mailed 22 notices to the property owners, and we published notice on May 27th in the newspaper. And we've received no letters in favor and 2 letters in opposition to the request. Staff is recommending approval with a 1-year expiration subject to the site plan as well as the floor plans, and a limit of 3 bedrooms, and our standard last 3 conditions. And these are your voting options. If you'd like to, I can answer your questions for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kira. I'll open the public hearing. Is the applicant here? And if so, would you like to speak? Commission members, do you have questions? Would you come to the podium, please? And just state your name and address, please.
My name is Eva Royer. Address is 520 West Bluff in Granbury.
Okay, Mr. Moore?
Hi, Ms. Royer. Are you the contact person for this property?
Yeah, I'm actually the owner, yeah.
Okay. And so in the event of trouble or whatever, would they be contacting you to make your way over here?
Yes.
And how far is it from your location?
I have another house at 536 Western Hills Trail, so 8 minutes.
Okay, so you live here?
I do.
Okay, you have listed on here that you're in Dallas.
That is my mailing address.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're living here then?
I live in Granbury.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you.
No, thanks.
Any questions for staff? If not, I'll close the public hearing and entertain a motion on the SUP request, please. Wow.
I'll make a motion for approval as presented.
I have a motion by Mr. Hallman to approve the SUP as presented by staff. A second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Hapes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next item on the agenda is D4, and you may note in the record that Commission member Mr. Watson is stepping out for this item number. Consider request of Texas Neighborhood Services to 1, amend the future land use map contained within the 2016 Comprehensive Plan on Lot 2, Block 1, Larned subdivision from public/semi-public to retail/office, and 2, rezone Lot 2, Block 1, Larned subdivision from business commercial BC to light commercial. The property is located at 1600 West Pearl Street. Kira?
Thank you. So this slide shows the aerial with the site outlined in teal. This is a zone request. I'm sorry. Give me a second here. Thank you. It's next to Stone Street there on Pearl. The map is correct. And as stated, the zoning is a change from BC to light commercial LC, and a companion case to change the future land use plan to amend that from public, semi-public to retail office. Yeah, I don't know what happened. Sorry about this. This is the zoning map, and it shows the yellow is residential zoning, and the pink is the BC business commercial. Across the street to the south is pink, which is light commercial, so that across the street matches the requested zoning, which is light commercial. And then the dark red that's nearby is heavy commercial. Those are public uses in that heavy commercial. So the order of intensification in terms of the zoning is residential, which is single family in this area. The yellow is single family. And then it's that lighter, well, maybe it's darker pink, depends how you look at it. But the subject site and the site next to it are BC business commercial, which is offices, and it also allows daycare. The light commercial is for retail, neighborhood retail, and offices, and then heavy commercial is much heavier than that. So I want to cover some context of the site location here also. As I've mentioned, the yellow shows the single-family residential, which is the case in this area. There's single-family residential along, I think that's Cherry and then Stone also. There are 2 unimproved lots on both sides of the subject property. Both of those unimproved lots are zoned residential and could be developed for residential purposes. Now, the business commercial on the site to the north is a daycare center, And the subject site itself historically was a daycare center. For many years, it was a Head Start use. And that is what the building is purposed for. So it's been a challenge to change that use, evidently. Otherwise, it would probably be occupied for some reason. It's not. But the applicant wants to change that to allow retail use, which the light retail, as the name suggests, could have retail. Light commercial, rather. Zoning. And this shows the designation of the future land use plan. The public, semi-public is geared for public uses, like government offices, parks, schools, those kinds of things. That designation can go just about anywhere because the characteristics of public use, a school is expected to be somewhere near a neighborhood. So I don't know the history exactly, but it kind of makes sense. A daycare would have a public designation. So we've got some narrative, and this is contained in your staff report also. I've kind of covered it verbally. What is public, semi-public use? And then what is the proposed retail office use? And it's characterized by retail uses. Sometimes they're found in more of a shopping center setting. However, where we have individual lots like this one, you can find retail office uses as well, and a comprehensive plan designation like this. And then the administration of future land use plan. These are questions that are in the land use plan narrative that could be asked when you're considering to make a decision on a future land use plan proposal. And I'll just go over these real high level. Would the proposal activate a property that's been vacant? Yes, this property has been vacant for 6 years according to the property owner. The prior use of the site was for a daycare, and its improvements could afford commercial reuse. Infrastructure on the site exists. So I'm reading these out of the staff report. I think the slide asks the questions. So this is staff analysis. The proposed retail office FLUP designation would support zoning of the property more broadly compared to the public, semi-public designation. So it gives the property more opportunity for uses. The proposal contributes to enhancement of the community's economic stability and goals and objectives, yes. Based on the retail office land use descriptions, there should be no negative impact on the adjacent residential areas. The use of the site should be compatible with residential uses nearby. Nearby uses are similar to the proposed land use designation, and those include offices, retail, and daycare uses, as mentioned previously in the slide presentation. And the proposed retail office designation would offer an additional property for the community's commercial and office land inventory. That's difficult to read, but we provide these in our slides just to demonstrate that we did have an application on file, and also for the zoning. And on June 1st of 23, staff mailed out 20 public notices, and we also provided notice in the newspaper on May 27th. We've received nothing in the way of support nor in opposition to the request. Staff is recommending approval of both the future land use plan amendment as well as the change of zoning. And these are your voting options for both projects. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Kira. I'll open the public hearing. Is the applicant here, and if so, or the representative, would you like to speak?
I'm here to answer any questions that you might have.
Do you have any questions, commission members, on either one of the items? No? All right, then I'll close the public hearing and entertain a motion on the amending the future land use map.
I'll move to approve the change to the future land use map as presented.
Have a motion by Mr. Haves to approve.
Second.
Second by Mr. Overdeer, right? Was that you? I had my head turned, sorry. Have a second by Mr. Overdeer. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And I'd like to entertain a motion, please, on the rezoning request.
So moved.
A motion by Mr. Moore to approve the rezoning request. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Hallman. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. All right, our last item agenda is items just for discussion tonight. It's a presentation related to zoning ordinance amendment proposal related to general provisions, administration, and nonconformities. The general purpose of the amendment is to clean up confusing language, offer administrative actions, ease the usability, and propose updates reflecting the 2023 Texas State Legislative Law amendments, all affecting the zoning ordinance. Kira?
Thank you. This item, the city has retained the services of Municipal Planning Services, LLC, MSP, Craig Farmer, to assist us in reviewing and revising and making proposals that would update the zoning ordinance. Mr. Farmer has a presentation for us, and I'd like to turn it over to him at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Howie. Again, my name is Craig Farmer. I'm with Municipal Planning Services, LLC. I was hired back in December to go through the zoning ordinance and look at streamlining it, removing obstacles to some types of development, in other places maintaining the level of quality, but at the same time figuring out a way to reduce obstacles, getting it approved and through the process. This is the first phase. First of all, I don't remember how to do this. Oh, it's not just me. Anyway, you may remember that I was the interim director, some of you, of community development for about 8 months, and before Ms. Wowie was hired. Coincidentally, at one point for about a month, the department that I was managing consisted of one person, Angela. And if it hadn't been for her, I don't know if we could have kept the wheels on the wagon, but we did, and now the department's fully functioning and fully staffed again, which is the good news. There we go. I think. Do I have to be smarter than the pointer? Oh, I forgot. I got to point it at the thing, don't I? Is it that one or this one? Once again, we get Angela to help us. Why don't you just I'll just say next page. I don't plan on backing up. Okay. Murphy's Law. I'm technology impaired. So what we've done is we've broken down in the contract it called for 3 phases. This next slide would show you the 3 phases, if it moves forward. First phase, was, of course, is to basically go through the ordinance and the documents and become familiar with it, which I was already somewhat familiar with it, and then develop a list of items that we thought needed improving, strengthening, loosening, whichever. There we go. We jumped a slide. So task 1 is to evaluate the ordinances. Go back 2. I lied. We do need to go back. Back 2. Okay. Now the next slide. So basically we broke it down, the contract broke it down into 3 phases, and one was to go through the ordinance and look at everything. Second part of it was to get with the city and the stakeholders and various people to identify the issues and concerns. Then the second task was to actually draft some regulations, and task 3 was to finalize it and help facilitate it through the development process or public hearing process. Next slide, please. So where we are after about 6 months is we basically have evaluated the entire ordinance, gone through it with a pretty fine-tooth comb, and looked at all the standards and everything. In terms of visiting with stakeholders, the staff and most of the people involved in administering the document have been visited with. We visited with some of the stakeholders. We have a list. We have not visited with all of them yet. Part of the reason is this next phase that we have here is mostly administrative changes. So I call that 60% complete. As far as the draft of the revisions, we're about 30% complete on that. And I'm here tonight with about 25% of the changes that we'll probably be bringing forward. And we'll go through some of those in a minute. So next slide. The first phase is what I call zoning amendments. This is more the administrative side of things. So you have, I believe, 14, 15 articles in your ordinance. Articles 1 is general provisions, Article 2 is administration of the zoning ordinance, and Article 3 is nonconformities. It turns out, even though this is mostly administrative, that there's a bunch of things in here that are affecting the development community and citizens in Granbury. Next slide, please. So under Article 1, general provisions, you have a document that looks about like this. This is a draft. There's a couple things in here that still need city attorney review. We've provided a PowerPoint sheet there with places to make notes as I go through it. I'm going to try to hit the high points and just, instead of reading it word for word, let you know what the change is and what the ramifications are. Classification of new and unlisted uses, you had provisions in your ordinance, but it basically took new and unlisted uses straight to the Planning and Zoning Commission, followed up by the City Council. There's been a few instances where there was a use that was so close to an existing use that it could have been lumped into that category, but the ordinance didn't allow any flexibility. So 1.8A is going to allow the director to interpret the nearest classification in the use chart to a proposed use. I'm trying to think of a good example, but tractor sales, I guess, is one that was pretty close to a similar use, but it wasn't classified that way, so it had to come to y'all. So an applicant would ask for an interpretation. He's got a proposed use that's not quite lined out in that use chart you have. This would allow the director to lump it into a category. The appeal of that decision would, of course, be to the city manager's office first, and then the appeal of the city manager's decision would be to the Planning and Zoning Commission and Council. So there's a process here. The standards used in that use chart would be in that district, the closest district, with the same standards for the new use. Next one. Oh, and if nobody can decide what category goes in, that obviously goes through the old process through P&Z and the council. Section 1.8, new and unlisted uses, regulation, interpretation, and modification. You have a provision 1.8B of interpretation of text requirements, but this is an entirely new section that we've come up with, and the community development director would actually make an interpretation of a requirement. Quite often, it may be an interpretation of his height measured from this point to that point, some of those kinds of things. Again, we feel like the director can do that. Appeal would be, again, to the city manager's office and then to the Planning and Zoning Commission and Council. Next slide, please. And stop me at any point. I'm used to being interrupted for questions. It's a good time to do it. So 1.8.C, again, we're talking about new and unlisted uses, interpretation of regulations, and modifications. This is really new. There are cities in Texas and around the country that allow a little bit of flexibility, again, on the part of the director, subject to review by the city manager's office and y'all. But this is called administrative modification of regulations. So right now, if somebody, for example, violates a setback by 6 inches, you'd be inclined to say, well, that's not that big a deal. Well, the problem is a violation of a setback of 6 inches. You can get to the closing before the title company, and the survey will show it, and it'll ball everything up until they run it through this process. This provision would allow the director to provide an up to 10% modification, not a variance, because a variance has to go Board of Adjustments and has all kinds of legal requirements. This is an administrative 10% modification to a minimum or a maximum. Size or width of a yard, setback, which I've just talked about, number of parking spaces, okay, up to a 10% modification. And I'm talking with staff, they would look for some kind of documentation that the 10% modification is warranted, either some kind of a study or a standard from national something. There's criteria in the document that you can look at as to when this would be granted. Landscaping or number of trees, okay, square footage of landscape or number of trees, 10% modification. I know this is a little bit unusual for y'all. Some cities do it, and it adds a lot of flexibility to the ordinances. You know, we wanted to bring it to you tonight so you can get more comfortable with this concept. Yes,
So
ma'am.
what's the flip side? What's the incentive not to grant it?
For the director or just,
Right.
yeah.
So
Well,
why would you say you wouldn't direct? Because if you say it's 10% and it's a 10-foot setback, it's probably going to start coming at us 11. So what is,
well, the
what is the flip side
10%
of
is
it?
going to be the limit, but there's some criteria in there where they're allowed to do this, and it's in page 6 of that document. But basically, you don't grant it to everybody. Let's say somebody has a porch that encroaches 2.5 feet into a 25-foot setback, but the building does not. Some of those kinds of administrative modifications. So it's for flexibility, and it's not to be granted on every particular one. And again, an appeal would be to y'all. I'm sorry, to the Board of Adjustments on this particular one. So because then it turns into a variance request, if that makes sense. Parking and trees, you know, that there should probably be some kind of a study or some kind of a unique situation that causes the need for the modification. Setbacks, again, you wouldn't give it to the whole block face to all the lots along a block, but a particular one, maybe there's a little bit of a problem with the shape of the lot and they've got to push it forward a little bit, something along those lines. It's really an effort to reduce the number of cases going to Board of Adjustments.
Question.
Yes, sir.
So I go and build a building and I'm off by 6 inches.
Right.
The director can say, we're okay with that, right?
Well, they'd formalize it and call it a modification, but
Right.
it'd go into the records, so it'd show up at the title company that it's approved.
So the next guy comes in and does it, and you say you don't want to do the whole block. At what point do you stop and then somebody doesn't say, well, you let him do it, why can't I?
Well, hopefully, the request for the modification is before you do anything. It's part of the building plans, in other words. I use the one as an example of an accident in the field, but normally they'll be trying to get permission to do something and say, we have a unique situation. We need to encroach in the front yard by this much, in the rear yard by this much, whatever it might be. So the one example is one I've run into quite often, that everybody says, well, can't you just turn the eye to a 6-inch, encroachment? Well, not really, because if it says 6 feet, it's 6 feet. So this is an effort to keep that from having to go to the Board of Adjustments. But the majority of these cases would be before you do anything as part of the plans. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah, and hopefully you're not doing it every time a building permit comes in, because then it's you got a problem. An appeal of the director's decision, whatever it is, if the neighbors don't like the decision, it's to the city manager and then the Board of Adjustments. So it's not unilateral that the applicant didn't get what they wanted. It can be anybody. Does that make sense? Oh. Oh, you're checking up on me, sir.
I think the timing is what we're talking about, needing to address. In order for somebody to file for a zoning board of adjustment case, it takes like 6 weeks to, at the best case scenario, to get it before the ZBA. And so it's really hard for somebody in the middle of a construction project to be able to stop what they're doing, let me give you an example. There was a house that was being constructed on a cul-de-sac, and when it all shook out, there was an error on the plat for that lot compared to the neighboring lots on what the setback was, and it was over here in this Old Town subdivision. So we had to make a decision whether that was truly a mistake or did they need to go through the ZBA. And so we wrestled with it for about a week and finally determined that's a mistake that was made in the plat, and it wasn't intended because there are other lots on the cul-de-sacs in that neighborhood with the same setback, but this one had a bigger setback. What that caused is for that front porch to be encroaching on the turn radius of that cul-de-sac, a pie-shaped piece of concrete that was going to be 7 square feet if you measured it out. So we made the decision that it was a mistake in the plat. And so if we had that provision, we wouldn't even have to come up with it was a mistake. It was just, that's one of those things that needs to be corrected on the fly. You would hate for somebody to have everything built. They turn in this situation, they turned in their form board survey for the concrete, and it illuminated that little piece of encroachment. And I'm like, I don't see how anybody can complain about a pie-shaped piece of concrete that consumes 7 square feet, not more than 7 square feet. And that's why it's so minimal, we decided to call it a mistake in the plat and corrected it that way. And this way would be much easier for everybody involved and the title companies that have to clear the deal. So it's timing. You know, we hate to hold people up. That's a big issue with all these things that we're looking at tonight. It's trying to be more developer friendly and trying to facilitate a faster turnaround on getting things approved for them to be able to move forward. There are times when we're going to have to say, no, you can't do that. But where you got a cul-de-sac that's in the houses next door or whatever, you just got to look at the neighborhood and make a decision. Some of the codes I've had in other cities would allow the city manager or the director of planning to look at the block. Say somebody wanted to build a house and they wanted to build it at the same setback as their neighbor houses, but the law was different for that lot. And so it allowed the city administration to do an average of what all the houses on that block, what their setback is, and adopt that as the standard for that property. So those kind of things that are flexible that you can fix on the fly instead of having to post notice, pay $250 and wait for everybody to get together and have a meeting. So I hope that helps. And he's doing a great job.
I gotta write that down.
I had to just chime in a little bit here. I'll sit here close.
Yeah, having been over development in the cities of, thrown out of the city? No, over development in the cities of Lubbock, Grand Prairie, Carrollton, McAllen. Oh, Weatherford's the last one. Anyway, every city I've worked in, the Board of Adjustments is kind of the relief valve to your regulations, and if there's a unique problem. The problem with variances is there's hardship standards, and they've been loosened up by the legislature, but it's still there. So when the guy needs 1.5 feet for the carport and he can't build it otherwise, and all he needs is 1.5 feet encroachment, you really can't document that's a hardship. Not 18 or 20 feet, but just 1.5 feet. So this is a mechanism that helps that relief system work. Can I answer any more questions about that section? Okay, certificates of occupancy, that's a minor change. It's basically required by the change in state law, and I'll go over that in a minute on non-conforming uses, but it provides that the Director of Community Development will work with the building official to issue a certificate of non-compliance. And I'll talk about non-conforming in a minute, so I won't get into too much detail right there. And 110H basically says that the 10% or any of this stuff cannot override a different ordinance that has more restrictive standards. So, you know, for example, the building code actually has a setback also for structures from a property line, depending on penetrations in the walls and things. So this could not override that. All right, common sense. That brings us to the Board of Adjustments, Article 2, and I should be jumping my slides. I didn't even say anything. Next slide, somewhere. Oh, we're there. They kept up. Thank you. 21A there, I want to get into a lot of detail, but there's been so many additions to your zoning ordinance. The Board of Adjustments is referred to about 3 different boards, so we just made sure everybody understands it's the same board. Under 21E, variances, the state statute was actually cleaned up and on hardship and that sort of thing, but it was numbered incorrectly in your ordinance, so we fixed that under item 2. But moving down to items 0.5 and 0.6, right now your ordinance says that if you get a variance from the Board of Adjustments, you have to take out a building permit or something within 90 days, or that variance becomes invalid. I've worked in some cities that just say a variance runs with the land, it's permanent. You know, I was actually had told the city manager, as a matter of fact, that I thought this was kind of a crazy thing, and I had never heard of it before. But then I checked about 6 of my client cities, and of the 6 client cities I checked with, 4 of them have some of them are 6 months, some of them are 90 days time limit. 2 of them had no time limits. The variance ran with the ground of the lot. So we changed that from 90 days to 1 year. Nobody's going to go get a variance and do the plans and the financing and incur all the expense before they get a variance, but then you get the variance, and then you got to go do all the rest of this stuff. It can take longer than the 90 days. So it's 1 year, it's valid. And then we added an administrative extension that if they've made substantial progress, but they still haven't gotten it across the goal line, sometimes things happen, need an easement or something, then the director can add an additional up to 180 days if there's substantial progress. It's still not permanent variance, but it does provide more flexibility. And you've had some cases where you've had complaints because people had a variance run out before they were able to get it underway. All right, and then next slide, please. Oh, special exceptions. Basically, it's the same issues. Your special exceptions are 90 days. We bumped it to 1 year and up to 180 days. Also, we added to the table of the Board of Adjustments, you don't have a provision if somebody comes in and they actually show a parking study, common parking, shared parking, all those kind of things. There's not really a process for reducing the number of parking spaces required. We're saying a special exception can go to the Board of Adjustments under the state law, basically, and they can get a reduction in the number of parking spaces. They can get a reduction in the square footage of landscaping or number of trees, or they can get approved alternative landscaping methods. I think later on, as we deal with the tree ordinance and the landscaping ordinance, we'll probably come up with a different process, but this is an interim in the middle. So there will be a board looking at those things. Most places prefer that parking studies and parking reductions go to the Planning and Zoning Commission, but you can't call it a special exception because that under state statute has to go to Board of Adjustments. So this is kind of an interim till we can address it. We'll be coming back later with a hard look at the parking ordinance and a hard look at the landscaping and tree ordinance. Any questions on those? All right, next one, please. So this is a new one that's required by state law, and my wife's kind of furious at me because I spent so much time working with the urban planners on the state legislature and what they've done to cities this last session. And I can answer questions. I overheard some comments about the legislature and, you know, don't have to get inspections on cars. My relatives are going to love that. But anyway, moving on. So amendments to the zoning ordinance. When you amend the zoning ordinance, staff has to send a public notice to adjacent property owners in writing saying that there's going to be a public hearing on a rezoning. So these bed and breakfasts and things you had tonight, they notified everybody within 200 feet. That's standard right now. The state statute, well, let me, item number A there, I'm going to talk to you in a minute about, we almost have to notify the whole world now after what the legislature did. And as part of that, the expenses of these written mailed notifications have gotten pretty extreme. One of the things we're allowing in this ordinance, if it works, subject to the attorney, city attorney, that you be able to use bulk mailing and postcards for these notices. There are some cities, it turned out El Paso does it and a couple others, surprisingly. I didn't know there were any in Texas that did it because I've not dealt with it before. But the reason is number 3 there. They've added in the statute, Chapter 211 of the Texas Local Government Code, that if you change the regulations or the map regarding a use classification, and you make somebody nonconforming, or you even might make somebody nonconforming, you're supposed to notify every one of those people you might make nonconforming in writing. Okay? Well, on the surface that sounds good. The problem is the way they wrote it. So for a text amendment, so if you change, let's say you take one of your districts, let's say in your commercial district you don't want to allow sexually oriented businesses anymore. Let's say you change that. You have to send a notice to anybody that could become nonconforming. You might actually have a list of those uses, but generally you're going to have to send a notice to everybody in the district, even though it's a text amendment. You didn't do anything with the map. You didn't rezone them. You changed the text. In addition, that notice has to go to not only the property owner, the real property owner in the tax roll, it's got to go to the business and personal property owner, which is on the tax roll too, so it just doubled the cost of the notice. But it also has to go to the occupant or the tenant. Well, there's very few cities in Texas know who the occupants and tenants of a piece of property are. I've been working with Ms. Valley. We're probably the first ones in Texas, you will be the first ones in Texas, to deal with this. The statute goes into effect June 1st, 2 weeks ago. So it was immediate, all right, upon passage. 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate passed it. This is a really onerous thing. What we've come up with is we think what we'll do is we'll take and the ordinance is going to provide it, the situs, I think is how you pronounce it, the actual physical address in the tax roll, and just send a letter to that person, to that address saying occupant. Okay, so we'll send, it'll be basically 3 written notices to each one of these properties. And again, you already have to send notice if you change the map lines. That's a classification change. You already got to send notice. But if it's a text change, you just got to send notice also. And that's huge. Well, and yes, and that's where the next item I think comes up. Next slide, please. The way the statute's worded, if you stick it in the mail to that particular address on the tax roll, and your city ordinances track that exactly. So you send a notice to the adjacent property owners. At the bottom of that notice, there needs to be a paragraph that says the city of Granbury, this is the statutory wording, the city of Granbury is holding a hearing that will determine whether you may lose the right to continue using your property for its current use. Please read this notice carefully. I'm of the opinion you ought to stick that on the bottom of every notice just to get everybody's attention and to be legal, to cover yourselves. Next slide, please.
I feel the tar pot warming up with that notice on there.
I was going to say,
And we're going to put Angela's phone number right below that. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. There. Oh, now go back. Sorry. Pulled the trigger twice. Well, I just happened to have in another one of my client cities a Board of Adjustments case, and because of the tax roll, 2 people were inadvertently missed. And they found out the day of the hearing at the Zoning Board of Adjustments. I have used this on tax increment reinvestment zones and other things, waiver of notice. And so I suggested to this particular community, I said, and I wrote the notice up saying, I, the undersigned, hereby waive the right to notice. I'm fully aware of this case. I've been briefed by the city and the applicant, and I'll show up at the meeting. I'm okay with it, whatever they want to put. it dawned on me that now that we have a notice that has to go to the whole world, there's a strong likelihood that somebody's going to show up and say, hey, I didn't get my notice. Well, in the one city's case, the people said, well, there's no sense delaying this thing 3 weeks, and the person, and we're okay. It was for a barn. Anyway, and they said, yeah, we got barns. We don't care. So they signed the thing, and they did it that night. Well, it occurred to me, so I have stuck this in this document. Now, this has not been reviewed by your attorney now. A different attorney thought it might be okay, but it's up to your city attorney on this one. But it's basically, if you miss someone in the notice, the applicant can go get with them and get a waiver of notice and bring it back. And the notice will say, I hereby waive, or I don't waive, and I want the public hearing moot. Okay? And again, the city attorney has the final determination. And that number 6 there happens all the time. 2 people go, I wasn't notified. All right? Well, if you put it, legally, if you put it in the mail, all right, to the addresses on the tax roll, now there may be an absentee owner, and this may be a tenant. Somebody may have sold the property. It doesn't matter. It's the last approved city tax roll. If it's properly deposited, then that's proper notice. And typically what most cities do is when they get returned letters, and on every case you get 1 or 2 comes back, you stick it in the file so you can document that, it wasn't delivered because. But number 6 also says that if it's due to the post office delaying the notice, or if it's due to an incorrect tax office address, you still met the legal requirement of putting it in the U.S. mail on the proper date. So that's the intent to clarify it. Again, these 3 items are still being reviewed by your city attorney. But I think I'm going to start sticking it in every ordinance because of the new notice requirements of the state. It's gotten really complicated, isn't it? It's good news for consultants, though. We'll be more employable. All right, so that brings us to the next slide is dealing with nonconformities, Article 3. And this is the last article that we're going to be dealing with. They really changed up a lot of things in this. Some of it's actually for the better, the legislature did. So, a nonconforming use is, a use was legal, it was either permitted at one point or it was annexed at one point, and it was legal, and then the rules were changed on them, so it becomes what's called nonconforming. Your ordinance has a provision in it. Well, I'll hold off a second on that one. So the first one is 3.1c, nonconforming uses of land, all right? And the best way to think of this is maybe a used car lot, and the zoning doesn't allow a used car lot, all right? But it's being used to sell used cars. So the use of the land is used cars. Now, your ordinance is real confusing right now because it implies that if I move a car off, I can't put one back. And the courts have not held that to be the case. The use of the land is selling used cars, so I can use that same area to sell used cars. I can't expand it, okay? I can't change it to a different nonconforming use, but if I've got a certain area for the sale of used cars, I get to keep doing it. It's kind of grandfathered is another way to think of it. So your ordinance is kind of confusing on that one because it said you couldn't add equipment. It said you couldn't add merchandise to a nonconforming use. Well, if you're a nonconforming store and you can't bring in new merchandise, that doesn't make any sense. So we're clarifying what that means. You're expanding the area, where you keep equipment and things. You're expanding the area where you've got merchandise, all right? Or you're expanding the area, this is for like not used car lots, but like rental equipment and rental trucks and things. So subject to those changes, the ordinance actually works fairly well now. So any questions on that part? This is use of land. The next one is use of structures. And we basically take all of these and refer it down to a section 3.1.f where we detail whether you can expand a nonconforming use or replace it or whatever. That was the only real change on the use of the structure. Now, the non-conforming use of the structure, instead of a used car lot and the use of the land, would be like, you know, a person had an office building and got annexed into his own single family. Well, the building might be conforming to the district, but the use inside the building's not. Does that make sense? So the last one, which is the next slide, is an actual non-conforming structure. This is where the structure itself, doesn't matter what's inside of it, it does not meet the setback requirements or the height requirements or whatever it might be. Again, it was permitted at one time as legal or was annexed that way. A lot of times you see annexations where the building's right on the property line and now you have a setback. So it's 3 different categories. Next slide, please. So 3.1F is where we talk about, and this is where you've had some problems. If I come in and I want to expand my non-conforming use, all right, how much can I expand it? Can I add 7 square feet? Can I add 30 square feet? How much can I add to it? What a lot of cities do is they have a 10% rule, 50% rule, and so we have done that here. We're allowing, again, the director to provide a one-time expansion up to 10%. Okay, so if you have a 2,000 square foot building that's non-conforming, you could add 200 square feet, all right? Again, the appeals are to the city manager, and I think the appeal on this one's to Board of Adjustments, right? Your ordinance right now says if I've got a non-conforming use and I want to expand it, it allows the Board of Adjustments to hear the case. Now, this is not a hardship variance. This is an expansion of a non-conforming use up to 50%. So if I had a daycare that got annexed and was in a residential area and it's sitting there, and this would allow the Board of Adjustments to send notices to adjacent property owners and allow expansion of that up to 50%. Does that make sense? Okay. Again, the intent of a zoning ordinance and the intent of nonconforming is to steer those nonconforming uses into going out of business someday and becoming conforming. Okay. Make that use conform to single family or commercial, whatever. So that brings us to the next item, which is destruction of nonconformity. So theoretically, if a tornado comes through and completely knocks down my non-conforming office building in a residential area, completely destroys it, there's no problem building it. I mean, there's no problem putting up a conforming building or use, all right? Because it's gone. It's destroyed. Part of the problem is, though, can you reconstruct it, and who lets you do it? You've not had that. Well, you did have a tornado a while back, but I don't think anything non-conforming was tagged. But this process here would allow the Board of Adjustments, if it's destroyed more, and you have this provision already in your ordinance, but it says 6 months. We changed that to say if it's destroyed, the Board of Adjustments could authorize you to begin reconstruction, and it has to start within 1 year, not 6 months. Okay? So the Board of Adjustments still has to authorize replacement. Technically, since it's been destroyed, you got to build a new building anyway, so you might as well build one that complies with the zoning ordinance. Okay? Next slide, please. Registration of nonconformity. This is part of what happens on the statutory thing. Your ordinance currently requires, I think it said 30 days to register a nonconforming use. A lot of zoning ordinances had provisions along those lines. We changed that up to say you've got up to 3 months after you become nonconforming to register it, and you should be issued a certificate of nonconformity so you can prove, 10 years from now when none of us are on staff, you can prove that you were nonconforming legally. You didn't just run out and build it illegally. But it also provides that if you didn't make the 3 months, if you didn't register it, you could still come in later and register it. You just got to bring in more proof to prove it. All right. The ordinance says that if you don't register it, then that's proof that it wasn't legally there as a nonconforming use, but you can still provide documentation and prove it. And that brings us to the last one.
Can I give a comment to that one, though, before we do? That last non-conforming thing is a very real problem. We've got people that own real estate, real estate that have been annexed into the city over the decades, and they need to sell the property for that same use, and because they didn't register that property back whenever it got annexed in 2011 or whatever, they didn't, we contend we mailed the notice to them. We have files that Angela keeps that shows the certified mail went somewhere to somebody and it was received, but for some reason or other it wasn't registered, and so they end up with a non-conforming building they can't even sell. So that's a problem, and we need a little bit of adjustment for that, because there's nothing harder on staff than to tell somebody, we're sorry, your building is non-conforming. You can no longer use it for that purpose. It's the law.
Okay.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I wouldn't see any reason.
So-
I mean,
so
we know
like-
it's non-conforming.
So what happens is they're trying to get a certificate of occupancy for a new business in there, and it's non-conforming and we cannot approve it because it's been non-conforming for whatever period of time, not in use or whatever. So if it sits vacant and not being rented, and then they come in and they've got it rented and somebody's wanting to put in a store that fits our zoning or whatever, our business that fits our zoning for that building, that's good, but, paved parking lots, asphalt or concrete requirements, all those things that we require for a building for aesthetics, used to, the masonry ordinance would kick in. So there's all those little details out there that we have to check the box, to be conforming. And we've got some at Acton that's really, they're two dead buildings because of this issue in Acton. And I can drive you to them. I can't tell you the address, but they've got a shared parking lot that's Cleachy or something, and it's been that way since before it was annexed. They've tried to sell it, and anyway, it all falls apart. So we need some way to get people where they can at least massage their process and get to where they're working with instead of just dead. And it's tough. So anyway, that's kind of where we're at on that. But it's important that we look at these issues. I appreciate y'all listening. This is just really a listening question session, so no action tonight, I'm sure. So there you are.
Yeah.
Yes,
Part of the problem comes about, let's take annexation, for example. I mean, you send notices to the registered taxpayer of the land, but it may be a tenant in the building with a non-conforming use. They won't know anything, okay? So that's part of the problem where it really gets muddled is documenting that they were in the building. If it's an outside thing, and we usually have aerial photographs somewhere around the time it happened, so we got pretty good documentation of outside. But if it's inside, especially with multiple tenants, it's almost impossible to document it. And so the registration process is in a lot of ordinances, and I can tell you in almost every city, people don't do it. You'll have a few that do it to protect themselves, but the majority don't. Although now we have a nice little sentence on the bottom that says, you might not be able to continue your use unless you come by. That might encourage them to come register.
annexation's over too, so we'll never do that again.
Well, that's not necessarily true, though, because, everybody said no more involuntary annexation. Well, no, it's a petition process. So up to 49% of those people don't want to come in the city. As long as 51% want to come in the city, then they're going to drag the others kicking and screaming. So you're still going to end up with some non-conforming things going on. So this is just a way to try to organize it and get it straight. So 3.1J is the last item, and you had it in your ordinance. I've got other cities that don't have it. I don't want to say how long I've been in this business, but let's call it over 40 years, and I think I've only amortized something 3 times in my entire career. Amortization is where something is so bad, you decide it can no longer continue as a non-conforming use, and you want it to go out of business and conform to the zoning ordinance. City of Dallas is notorious for all the wrecking yards, shutting them down, especially around, areas where they're trying to expand downtown and things. So that is the process. Section-oriented businesses, Kennedale used this on about 6 of them, I think. I forget how many. They had a bunch of them, and they got rid of about all but one, I think. So amortization is a process. Now, I got involved in suggesting different language for the bill that finally got passed. The new section 211.019 is the statutory new number. But it came back that there is some city somewhere, probably a big one, that was doing an amortization, and for example, a wrecking yard hasn't invested any money in the property in probably 20, 30, 40 years. Well, the way amortization works is the Board of Adjustments looks and says, how much did you invest in your property? And then they document how much they got, and they say, well, you have this much time to amortize it and get your investment back. Well, because they hadn't invested anything, they said, well, you got to go out of business tomorrow. So that's where this came from. I don't totally disagree with the new statute, but there are a few provisions. So the next slide, well, this covers it. 3IJ, there is about 3 pages of yellow, all new stuff, all paraphrasing the new statutes. In the old days, determining how much a property was worth, including in your ordinance, and it's shown in strikeouts, was you looked at how much they invested in it and to see if they wanted to amortize it. I actually like the new statute that says, no, you look at the day it became nonconforming and the market value of the property on the day it became nonconforming and the market value on the day you want it to go out of business, okay? And you pay the difference, all right? So if a property now is worth more than when you made it nonconforming, you don't have to pay them anything on that part. You do have to pay them for relocation expenses. That's new. And even the amortization part is not based on that what they invested in. It's based on the market value when you made it non-conforming and the market value when you wanted to go out of business. So I kind of like that. Part I don't like is the property owner gets to choose whether you give them additional time to amortize their the difference in the market value. In other words, they'll lose money on the deal, or you have to pay them cash, the city. So I'm not real crazy about that. Again, there are very few cities that even amortize. You've never done it from what I know. So it's probably not an issue for you, but you need to be aware of the new statute. So we paraphrase the statute exactly. It became effective June 1st, and you may have the first one on the books, well, in July, I guess. We did send this out, this language out to probably 300 planners and cities around Texas to ask their comments, because it was one of the first ones I'd ever seen or heard of. Ms. Wowie authorized us to do it just to, do a test run. And they all came back saying, yeah, it was great language. They had a couple changes. So, but it tracks the statute. So that's a long-winded presentation about what all that stuff means. This is phase 1. We'll be coming back with 2 and 3 that'll look at trees, landscaping, parking, a lot of those other things. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Questions? Discussion?
I wore you out.
They all look blank. Okay, thank you, Craig. If no further questions for him, then the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for attending.